Mr. Amadon?
Here.
Mr. Gobb? Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Mr. Mellon?
Here.
Ms. Simonis?
Here.
Councilman Rohr?
Here.
Vice Chairman McIntyre?
Here.
You probably need to do a motion to excuse Mr. Gall.
Okay.
I was under the impression that he was going to be here, but he may have forgotten.
All right.
I'll move we excuse.
Second.
Walt.
I'm going to call roll.
Okay.
Mr. Amadon?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Mellon?
Yes.
Ms. Simonis?
Yes.
Councilman Rohr?
Yes.
Vice Chairwoman McIntyre?
Yes. Okay, it looks like we need a motion to accept the approval for the motion and summary for the Airport Commission meeting of April 21st as recorded and transcribed.
Second.
I'm sorry, who's that?
Who was the second?
Mr.
Thank you.
Lewis.
Thank you. Ready? Mr. Amadon?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Mellon?
Yes.
Ms. Simonis?
Yes.
Councilman Rohr?
Yes.
Vice Chairwoman McIntyre?
Yes. Okay, the next item on the agenda is public comments. I see we have a number of people in our audience today. Welcome. Anyone like to share any comments at this time? No? Okay. All right, the next item is the discussion for the strategic business plan for the Delaware Municipal Airport, and City Manager, Mr. Holman.
Thank you for having me this evening, and I know we had talked about doing this at the last meeting, but I don't think we had a sufficient number of members, so hence the special meeting as opposed to waiting another couple of months. So I really want to thank you for scheduling this special meeting for a discussion, a conversation about the future of the airport. It's in terms of its operations, what we envision for that airport. But before I get into that, I want to just thank the Airport Commission for the work that you do on behalf of the city. It's important work. This commission was set up over 15 years ago with the idea that it would provide recommendations to the city council with respect to the airport, and I think that's worked out well. I think we're at a point now, having just completed a major number of major improvements out there, in particular the lengthening of the runway, that I think we need to ask ourselves, where do we see the airport headed? What do we envision for that airport beyond what it is today? And I think a plan would help us get to that point. And I wanted to kind of start the conversation with you folks this evening about that. And obviously, if we go forward with a planning process, the conversation is beyond just the Airport Commission. It's the users of the airport. It's other stakeholders that are involved in the airport. And it's really something that I think, given the fact that where the city is headed with its growth, given the fact that Sawmill Parkway is due to be completed at the end of this year, there's going to be more interest in that airport, whether it's more corporate traffic that comes through there, more corporate hangars that might get there, more T hangars that the city might do, any number of different things. But I think we need to be positioned as a community to be able to point folks in the right direction with respect to what our plan is. We did a planning process back in the early 2000s, and I'll share that plan with you. It really talked about, did an existing inventory of our airport, talked about what the assets were out there, took a look at total number of flight operations on a daily basis, on an annual basis, took a look at transient traffic, non-transient traffic, took a look at airport fuel sales and those kinds of things. But there's a whole business side of the airport that I think is important to evaluate from time to time, whether it's what we charge in rent, and that's on your agenda tonight, to what we might charge for land leases, those kinds of things, and what kind of services we might want to see out there, more services. We as a community are promoting economic development, and that's an important part of how we grow and what's made the city, what's given us the financial condition we have today, and the airport's a part of that. But I think it could be more than it is, and that's why I'm here tonight to talk to you about that and looking into the feasibility of starting a planning process that might ultimately probably involve hiring a consultant, because we're not experts at this. Essentially, you're purchasing capacity that we don't have right now. We don't have the expertise necessarily to do this, but I think we have. I provided an example of a plan that was done out in King County, Washington. Much bigger airport, but these are scalable, these types of things. So that's why I asked to be on the agenda tonight, is to start the conversation with you and get your feedback, your thoughts about it. I know, Jane, you've been involved in the airport for a number of years. Some of you are pilots and have that perspective. But I think we really need to, I think, update what we have, given the fact that we're going to have more interest in that facility. And right now, if you ask me today, well, how many more T hangars should we build? What's the plan for the T hangars? What's the plan for the corporate hangars? And how are we going to do that? We have the airport layout plan, but beyond that, I think we need the business side of it as well. So that's my my opening comments about the need to, I think, engage in this process.
Thank you. Questions?
I'd like to say I'm really happy that you're involved in it, because I've been involved in the airport and on this commission for quite a few years off and on now. And I've asked the question several times, what do we want to be when we grow up?
Exactly.
And I've never gotten what I thought was a thoughtful answer on that. Do we want cargo operations? Well, maybe, people have said yes because we want the fuel sales. People have said no because of the noise abatements. Do we want more flight training? Do we want privatization of different things? And nobody ever seems to be able to nail it down. And hopefully this is maybe a step in that direction.
That's exactly what it is, I think, is to try to answer that question. There might be several different, there's several different answers. When we did the study back in 2001, they looked at different governance structures and different ways to operate, but we never got beyond trying to figure out what is it that how we envision it. And I think what we've been able to do is much of the growth of the airport has been driven through the FAA. The grants they've made available to us, which we've availed ourselves to, and have made that airport a much better airport. But had we not had those grants,
the grounds go in the last 15 or 20 years. I mean, the airport's been leaps and bounds. I mean, it's
right.
Much improved. As far as the real growth in what we do there, other than Dr. Schottmer's hangar and the airspace place, not much has happened there.
Yeah, I think that's really what that's my observation. I think there's going to be more interest. We had some folks from Ohio University out there the other day at the airport, just talking to them about their business campus in Dublin, and they weren't aware that they could fly into the Delaware airport. They've been flying into Duns Scott or Port Columbus and driving through that traffic to get to Dublin, to their new campus there. Now they know that, but that's kind of the marketing side of it. And Kevin and his staff, Joe and his staff, do an outstanding job of the day-to-day operations of maintaining it, making sure the grass is cut, making sure we have the fuel there, and it's clean and it looks good and the appearance is good. But marketing it as an airport for transient users, for more of the corporate traffic, that's where we've, as a full service city, we have a big array of services we provide, and the airport's one of them, but that's not necessarily our core, it's not one of our core businesses. And so that's where I think the plan could be. could be helpful.
What kind of information is given out now in terms of when someone in development gets a question about the airport? Do they?
Sean works our economic development director, Sean Hughes, works very closely with the staff, with Joe and Kevin. Kevin was part of the meeting we had yesterday with some folks about the airport. So there's that, and Kevin, you could expand on that if you'd like.
Throughout the year, we usually have 1, 2, 3 people that want to know about the airport, building a hangar, basing a jet, things like that. We usually have a brief conversation with them, get some idea if they're looking for hangar space now, what type of aircraft they have, let them know that there are land lease opportunities within the city, and usually direct them to the economic development director at that point. But, tour them around, whatever they want to see or know, I'll answer. But, beyond that, I usually send it to the economic development director.
Have we kept a list of those folks so that we could reach out to them at a future date?
Sometimes you don't even get a business card from them.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, Joe was there a couple days ago. We were talking about the construction. The gentleman walked in. He said, "You have hangar space for King Air 350." And I gave them Mr. Shopper's information. Some people don't. There's someone working for a company that just has feelers out looking at different areas and don't necessarily want to tell you who they are, but maybe they come back and give you more information the next time.
Well, that happened this week. Phone call this week, gentleman looking for hangar space, and Kevin asked him to ask who he's with, and he said, "No, I prefer not to say. Do you have room to house our jet?"
Is there any sort of follow-up after that, after a certain period of time, if you've not heard from that particular individual or individuals?
Actually, we have a list of probably 5, 6 individuals right now, Kevin, looking for jet space. Kevin actually has followed up on a couple larger aircraft, letting them know that we have a 800-foot runway now, because unless it was completely dry at 5,000 feet, they were not able to come in and out. They were worried about getting stranded. One gentleman out of Seattle and another one local. In the last, say, 2 years, Kevin, that seems to be where our interest points are coming, are individuals, private and companies, kind of on the jet side of things. And we've actually referred some to John to ask him if he's had space also available for him. So we've walked individuals around, measured John's hangar, looked at John's hangar, I don't know how many times, but kind of as a segue into individuals. And then, like Kevin said, Sean's involved in it, and basically letting them know that if that's what we have right now, but we are open to opportunities in the future. Like I said, I know Kevin's actually reached out this week to a couple of individuals, let them know that we are at 5,800 feet now, because that was their large concern, was being trapped here if the runway was not completely dry at 5,000 feet. Couldn't come in and come out. So follow up the best we can, but there are some individuals that are, like Kevin said, just putting their feelers out. Some people don't want other individuals to know their name, want to know that they're looking. We've had individuals that don't even want, corporations that were based there before don't even want you to know who they're working for. So, but I mean, I believe that we do the best that we can do with what we have.
Sounds like we've missed a number of opportunities, however, to grow the airport. If they're, for whatever reason, whether it's runway or length or hangar space or whatever it might be, it sounds like we've missed.
Is hangar space
lot of-
available for a larger aircraft today?
Nope.
No?
Now, there's the airport layout plan, which clearly shows an area where, corporate and other corporate hangar right next to what Dr. Schottmer has built. So, but that's the kind of, we're going to see more of this. And I think the sooner we can, update what we have and answer the question of what do we envision? That's part of it.
Yeah, and is that what we want? Do we want, more small jets? Do we want some cargo activities going on that would support the Honda plants or PPG or whatever?
And the other side of that is what's realistic, because we've had contacts forever. We had contacts 20 years ago. When you get that runway extended and moved, which was before it became the 5,000-foot runway, we're very much interested. Cardinal Health at one point, Red Roof Inn, a number of different entities. And again, there was a lot of follow-up. Well, we focused our energies on getting that runway moved, buildings moved over, extended, and the fuel system put in, and yeah, then they still weren't ready to pull, and so there's been a series of things. I think you've seen over the last 15 years or so, we need to get an AWOS system, we need to get this, and gradually we're adding some of those things. Part of the analysis has to be is this is what we tried to do 15, 20 years ago, what else beyond just having facilities? Is there a market? Sometimes that goes up and down. Several years ago, things were going gangbusters. We're going to have these small jets that are going to be all around, and they slowed down, died off. What does it take to, if you determine that, yes, that's what you want, what type of investment, what does that mean, big picture? What are those things that are necessary? The latest go around as well, as Joe mentioned, 5,000 runway is great, but you have a window of potential you can't take off, and so we'll see. But again, that reality of what it takes to get the investment, assuming you want that type of investment. We've had people that want very private type of operations, didn't necessarily want to be people tracking where they were coming and going, and runs the gamut. But just a lot of interest, but making that actual investment short of time hasn't happened a lot.
Kevin, do we still have the 3 potential places to put the 3 additional hangars? To build 3 additional hangars?
T hangars or corporate hangars?
T.
Yeah, the land all the way to the west. Take it clear out to the connector to runway 10 is
Okay.
for all possible future development.
Is it possible to make any of those hangars, if somebody decides that they want to come in and develop those, to make those live-in hangars where they have apartment spaces above?
That would not be allowed for
Okay.
FAA.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Do we have a need for additional T hangars right now? I know that John is opening up, I don't know, 8 or 10 more.
Yeah, I'm allowed to speak, just so you know that.
Yeah, you probably,
You'll have to come up.
yeah, because
Chair,
what?
If you could just please state your name and address to the record.
John Schottmer, 691 Old Pond Lane in Val. And that, just for the Airport Commission's information, the third T hangar building of the Airspace Place triad had been sitting for 10 years as just a shell. It was, they covered it because they didn't want the slab to crack and get ruined, so it had a shell over it, but the inside was not finished. That was for their future expansion, which they kind of gave up on. And I purchased back in about June, May, or June, maybe it was May. I did purchase that building in its entirety, 11 units. They're being finished right now, and they're just about done. We're on the last stages of getting those finished out, and so there will be 11 additional T hangars opening up here within the next 30 days. So, for what it's worth. And then, so as far as T hanger availability, we just have to see how quickly those fill up, and whether there's still a
So
waiting
that'll
list.
take us to what, 60 or so? I
The
don't
city
know.
has 60, and then the Airspace Place development's 36.
So 96 total.
And the occupancy rate still is in the high 90s?
All the city hangars are full. I believe that 2 of the Airspace Place hangars are full, except for the 2 adjoining units. And then Mr.
2 of those have airplanes of mine, or really mine and one that's renting from me that I had to overflow out of the big hangar. So those 2 will come open as soon as of the 11, I'm taking 2 of them, and there'll be 9 additional, and then Airspace will have those 2 open.
Right.
So it'll still be 11 new hangars.
Safer still.
Have you been keeping any sort of wait list for the hangars?
Yep, I have 24 people on a wait list. However, I've had enough tie-down tenants that have been waiting for a hangar development that I haven't needed to use the wait list. Anyone who is a tie-down tenant already gets preference for first available hangars, and we put them into the oldest units because we have tenants that are already in an old unit that are on an upgrade list for the first available buy hold. So haven't needed to use the wait list, but we've always have an influx of tie-down tenants that take them right away.
Do you have any idea of those that are on the wait list, whether they're coming from another airport, or do you have any way?
I have notes for everyone. Some people are builders, some people are looking to purchase, and years back when I've gone to that list, some of those people have found a hangar. Some of them not as far along in the building process as they thought they were. There were some people that we contacted them a few months before they were ready in the construction, but they took the hangar because they didn't want to miss it. So out of the 24 people, you might remove 10 from that by the time you call. Some people like to be on the list just in case, I lose my hangar at Bolton or wherever. So, maybe in reality, there's only 15 solid people in there, but that's still a pretty good list.
Or someone's looking for a cheaper hangar.
Right.
Maybe there is a demand for another hangar then.
Yeah, and I think part of the planning process would try to evaluate that. What's your existing inventory? Test the demand for the market, figure out where we are in terms of market, the rent, that type of thing. That's really what we need to
It
do.
seems like the newer T hangars are gonna get close to paid off pretty soon.
Well, that's one of the reasons Dean's here this evening, is to talk about the rent and maybe taking a look at answering that question, but yes.
But then the next question is that what we want? I mean, if you read through here and look, King County's initiative was maybe not to encourage that kind of traffic.
Yeah, and again, that's a strategic policy question that we need to talk about and yeah. I mean, it's a general aviation airport. That's much bigger. It's Boeing is there and everything. It's a question that's a good question.
That was another question I have when I looked at it. I've been to this airport
Okay,
before. And I thought, well, there's not much similarity between that airport and us.
Yeah,
Is
I was
there
looking at
another-
it more for just the way they evaluated the airport in terms of the fuel, the rents they charge, the business side of it as opposed.
Process.
Exactly. To me, that was applicable, that's scalable, I guess, to a GA airport or a large scale airport.
Kevin, is this something that they've talked about at any of the ODOT and FAA conferences?
I can't say that they have. Those breakout sessions, you kind of go to the ones that you're interested in. I usually go to operation-related things. I don't ever remember seeing anything like this on the agenda.
So this isn't really something that ODOT or FAA is kind of, I don't want to say proposing, but is behind?
Well, I think if we talk to the ADO, if we talk to our district office and talk to, is it Brian? Tim Tenkoff, Brian Tenkoff, he'd say it makes sense. I mean, you just invested $10 million of our money in your airport, and what's your vision? And if the vision is to continue to be a good general aviation airport and have a combination of corporate tenants and general aviation tenants, and that's fine. But I think we're performing below our ability, I guess, in terms of the airport. And if you look at that investment that's made, that we made and that the feds made, I think we need to see if we can increase the activity out at that airport. And I guess that question, John, you raise is what is that activity? If it's more just general aviation, if it's more corporate, if it's through the fence operations that we might get FAA to agree with, there could be more corporate, our economic development director would tell you there's other partnerships that we could be looking at that would use that airport. The other question at some point is how it's governed. Now it's the city of Delaware. It's just one more department that we have, and that's part of our challenge, as Joe pointed out. We're doing the best we can with what we have, but we don't have an airport marketing specialist who does nothing but try to generate more fuel sales at that airport through getting more people to land there and take off and that type of thing. We don't have that.
Would that be a possibility if it were something built into the strategic plan?
Possibly, yeah. But what I guess my point was, the governance is, right now it's the city of Delaware. Could it be the city and the county? Could it be some sort of an authority? I mean, there's just different models out there. than the one we have, which works, and it works pretty well, but I just view it as we're at a kind of a crossroads here with Sawmill Parkway coming up and us putting more and more emphasis on economic development, and with a 5,000-foot runway, Kevin was indicating it's one of the only.
It's one of the longest GA runways in the state.
Now, we should be marketing that. I mean, I would think to get at least, if nothing else, more traffic coming through to buy fuel. And that's the hard part. It's just, it's a department within a city that has a lot of departments, it's doing a lot of things. And I think the plan would provide, I think, a little more focus and strategic direction for.
I've been on this committee for about at least 8, if not going on 10 years with this, and have you ever heard of marketing for us? For the airport?
Not.
I mean, the marketing is what we're trying to do, but it's not that's,
Yeah,
again.
with the change and going to 5,800, I mean, that's a whole new ballgame.
The challenge comes years and years ago. The whole marketing issue became not just an issue of marketing. It seems to make sense, but marketing for what? And again, as Tom was saying, being a public entity, the issues discussed years ago from the strategic side is, do we let the private sector do that? Do we let an FBO come in and set the table such that they see the cause and effect and the benefit of marketing because that impacts their business? And, we had a lot of input from people that predated you that did a lot of activity out at the airport at the city. That's what you need to do. Let the private sector come in. They'll do the things that need to get done. Then that didn't necessarily materialize. One of the things we've tried to do over the years is maintain that ability to, if the dynamics were right, the right type of entity would come in, let them be the business entity primarily that does it. Obviously, we kept management control and ownership of the airport and to get to that point. But maybe now is the time. Maybe the stars and moons and everything else are aligning with the road improvement and getting the runway extended. That might be the approach. That's part of that strategic analysis to say what does make sense. Maybe it's such that we did at one point. I think we went out and tried to solicit FBOs that would come in and have fuel operation. Yeah, throw some carrots out there because it's not, a lot of things in aviation aren't profitable. So you had to have the means, but our interest was the, indirect growth of the airport that then led to other things. And, but again, you got to get the right type of individual interested in that, and maybe the time's right, but we need to revisit that concept as a possibility.
We never had the money. I mean, we were trying to make it, the direction I felt like city council was telling us is like, try to break even. And then with the recession all these years, it has hamstrung us in about what we can actually do.
Yeah, and what we're seeing now, I think, Greg, is we're seeing a resurgence in the local economy.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing a major investment that just got completed at the airport. We're seeing a huge investment in a transportation facility that's coming up. It's going to be within a stone's throw of the airport. Those types of things, I think, are positioning us better, I think, to say yes. It's less about, where to find the dollars to do the plan as it is to do the plan and then work it. And to me, I think that's what, we want to be able to try to do.
How many individuals, John, do you think have approached you in probably the last year or two looking for hangar space that you haven't been able to accept because you've been at capacity?
Well, it's kind of like your T-hanger list. I've had people that sniff around off and on for years. They'll keep coming back over and over, and it gets hot, and it seems like they're going to bring a jet, and then they disappear. They reapproach. But there's no question, in the last couple of years, aviation has picked up. I actually have not hit capacity until Jags brought their second jet. That's when we hit the wall as far as, that's where we're full, I can't take any more. And that was just in December. So it hasn't been a long time, but at the same time, in the last year, I have probably had what I would say are 2 or 3 solid I've had probably 5 or 6, but a couple of them I thought were clearly just
Right.
a fishing expedition. I've had 2 or 3 what I would say are solid people looking, and I just haven't felt my space.
For jet space.
Yeah, or like King Air side.
Correct. Yeah, I was thinking it might be 5 or 6 solid, more than that, but that's why I was curious.
The interest level is up, there's no question. But again, then it just comes down to, I would, at least from my experience being out there 10 years, for every 5 people that say they want to come out there, you're going to get maybe 1. And 4 of them are going to back out or
Correct.
find something else, or whatever.
So why do you think they would back out or look for something else?
Well, a lot of times it's a chief pilot or a wannabe chief pilot that's coming to you and he's just sniffing out, he thinks he's hooked up with some mysterious owner and they don't want to say who it is and they're looking to buy an XYZ jet and I'm just fishing around to see like, if we buy this jet, do you have space? And those I don't think are solid.
And some are just shopping for a bargain.
Correct. And the solid ones are when I get a guy that says, I have a King Air, I want to move it right now. And you don't get that many of those, but they do.
There are a few out there right now.
I've heard off and on over the years that Jegs is going to build their own hangar. Is that still a rumor?
We've heard that as
Still a
well.
rumor?
But they're at least storing, they're using this storage, so, yeah, we've heard that same thing.
Okay.
Be interesting too, after the T hangars are done and with the wait list and that, if that fills up right away, and then we have still a lot on the wait list, is there, do we or do we not think about or contemplate building another one if we've got a lot on the wait list? Where you
When
can
you
go
say
to
we, meaning,
The city or?
the city
well, we
or private or what, however.
ultimately we'll probably get into that, we'll talk about the rates, but I think you'll find out, because I sat this 15, 16 years ago, we had to go out on a limb, that city council would invest over $1 million. Why should, because all they hear from people is you need to get out of the way, let the private sector do it. But nobody stepped up. And so we had interest and they took on a bit of a risk. And I think John asked the question, how much is we still owe $800,000 on that existing one? And initially it was maybe 25 years, when I was looking more like 30 years before it gets to the point where it's paying off.
Why? Because I thought our interest rates had gone down and we were able to pay down the principal more quickly, and I thought it would be more like 20 instead of 25. This was several years ago when I heard this, or when we had this conversation.
No,
I don't know if you were
was
here,
it
Tim.
Tim Browning gave a
Yeah.
discussion.
Our existing debt service on the $1.1 billion we borrowed, and I rolled notes, I didn't issue the long-term, we needed cash flow up front to be able to at least service it, because just paying the property tax in 2006 and the debt service on, we still got 15 years to pay on it, is $98,000 a year. We take in $85,000 a year in rent. So
we're losing on them?
well, I could get it fine losing. That's why I couldn't bond the debt right away, because I needed to build up. I wasn't paying any principal for 3 or 4 or 5 years after we built those buildings, so that I could build up a cushion, such I knew that the cash flow in the earlier years, but also part of that presentation that I convinced council to take the risk included annual 2% increases in rent and the 98% occupancy rate. Maybe we met that, but we haven't on the rent increases, but we're still, from a cash flow standpoint, we're not having to subsidize that from city funds. But it won't be as it's currently structured. 2031 is when those bonds pay off. And it'll probably be based on the projections here, probably 2024, 2025, where there's a little bit of positive cash flow, where at least the rent coming in covers the debt and just the real estate taxes. That doesn't include, we have electric costs, a little bit of maintenance, not a lot, as you may well know. So insurance that we have to pay on that, so.
See, and that's what my contention's been all along here for a number of years I've mentioned, is that you've got to set some money back for repairs, because eventually you're gonna have to pay the piper here.
And setting that money back, I think always hit up against nobody wanted the rent increase. And even from a business standpoint, you price yourself out, as these gentlemen have said, some people are just fishing for lower rent. They need to be occupied. And if they're not, if the rates are such that you're only 80% occupancy, this thing doesn't pencil out at all. The bigger question, even what you were originally talking about, would I be as confident? Well, I think it's going to ultimately do what we indicated it would. If we built 30 more units, what could anybody predict whether those are going to fill up, and what's the rent we're going to be able to charge? Because to a certain, maybe we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Some of your existing tenants and the people coming in, are looking for, a lot of that deals with other competitions or vacancies at other airports. But so it's not like it's necessarily a no-brainer. There's a certain amount of risk, and the biggest challenge we had 15 years ago is the private sector is all about taking risk, and all the private sector flyers out there, a lot of people, none of them up here, were pretty adamant. This is a no-brainer. Well, why would you do it? And as John said, it's not there's no guarantee sometimes in the industry or whatever you want to call it, that slow down a little bit and you're, maybe not. And, but if ultimately that becomes part strategically, when you can define, here's why we want to do it. One of the issues in trying to communicate to city councils, we need to get the based aircraft out there. If we can't get the based aircraft out there, we can't qualify maybe for some of the FAA money to get the AWAS system, to get this, to get that. Bigger picture is getting that airport, in one sense anyways, to be a viable tool for the city for economic development, and not necessarily directly at the airport. There's only so much we can do to market the city to businesses to come in here, and that may be one area very viable for whatever purpose it might be, even if it's just to get people in and out or a little widget in and out quick. Maybe at some point that's the angle we need to attract a business that locates off Pittsburgh Drive or someplace else. Trying to convince conservative council members that that's investing in economic development, just like doing other things, is a tough sell. But it helps obviously, and it came up again. We have to reassess the markets and say, are we reasonably confident that we're not going to have to subsidize it in a much more direct way than it pay for itself over time?
That's not the message I remember Tim Browning giving us.
Nope, totally different. Totally different.
Well, it hasn't changed in a long time. I don't know where it was Tim or who it was, at what point, what he was communicating. Now, I can tell you that looking at refinancing this debt, because we had a call provision when I issued the bonds 15 years ago. They were called December 1st, 2016, based on the markets today, but this issue will go out probably after the presidential elections. Who knows what's going to happen in the markets? But that might work to our favor. I'm reasonably confident that I can refinance and get our debt service payments to reduce by maybe $8,000 to $9,000 a year. Should help.
Now, if we can do that and tie it with taking a look at our rents and in agreeing that they're going to escalate on a basis every few years, but that hasn't happened in the last few years. So
we were, because of the recession, we were reluctant to go ahead and raise it at that particular time. So, but now I feel like we're we need, and I think they would be pretty well understanding that you can't expect to get the same buck, and it's been what, 6 years or better since we've had a raise. It's at least, I wouldn't say that.
Well,
I think it's
been at least that. What are we currently charging for our
$179 for the manual sliding door, $246 for the bifold, and then if it's an end unit, it's $405.
And the glass increase was 2010.
10's what I'm thinking.
6 years ago.
in Marysville? And typically are we?
Marysville is right over there.
Marysville.
Oh, what do you charge?
I am no longer affiliated with Marysville.
hangar.
Okay.
But I can tell you the T hangar rates are 200 for an interior, 25 for an engine.
Sorry,
I know,
Elaine, we shouldn't be
I gotta
doing this.
stop.
You're supposed to come up and identify yourself because it's being,
This is
being
being
broadcast.
recorded,
Sorry.
so if you don't mind, please coming up and stating your name and address for the record, and I
I can
apologize.
state it for you because we've got the prices right here. It's 44-foot electric bifold door is $200 and $225 for an in unit with a man door.
right. But anyway, that's another component of planning is what should that be and setting it as a policy and saying if another recession occurs, we might take a time out, but otherwise we're going to have a predictable increase based upon what we need to do to maintain, to pay off the debt and pay these down sooner. And
Well, and we don't want to price ourselves out of the market, and different people say our competition is a different place. I mean, some people say that we're competing against Ohio State, and maybe we are to some extent. Some say we're competing against Marysville or Marion or Knox County, but we're different from all those. I think we can justify being more than what Marysville is because we've got a bigger population base. I think we've got a longer runway.
yeah,
I don't think we can justify what Ohio State does though. They're probably what, 400, 500?
Ohio State on 44-foot manual doors, 265, where we're 179. 44-foot electric door, 275, and then with an end unit with a man door, they're 505.
Yeah.
What was Marion?
yeah. So you're right, John. It's not Ohio State, but it's probably higher than some of the other
175 manual, end unit
some of the other
200.
counties.
Yeah. And I
Those are-
saw,
those are privately
and my colleague has his plane based in Marion, and I look at our T hangars and I look at what Marion's is, and it's unfortunately Marion, where he's got his plane at, is very shabby.
Oh, look at the runway.
To say the least.
Look at the runway condition even.
Well, that goes from.
Yeah, that's the thing. We just
GTE
made
to-
these investments, the rent, I don't think there's any argument that your facilities you just increased your facilities in terms of the condition, and
Mhm.
why shouldn't you look at the rent?
So what do we want to do here?
Well, I just wanted to start the conversation with the commission and ask if you're interested in pursuing it, and if you would be, then we might come back with maybe an outline of what a plan might entail, or updating the plan might entail, and how we might go about getting those services, figuring out what the order of magnitude cost might be, how it might be paid for. I really just wanted to understand if there was an interest in pursuing this, and if there is, then I would come back, as I say, and give you an outline of what it might look like and how we might approach it.
I think it sounds like everyone is pretty much in favor of
Mhm.
doing
Okay.
something in some form.
Yeah, it's just trying to figure that out. I think I'd reach out to the FAA, the ADO, and talk to them, get their input, talk to the state, get their input, have Kevin and Joe maybe do some due diligence about some other GA airports that have done this. We're not the only one. But it gets back to John's threshold question, how do we, what's the direction we should be headed? So that's a lot of it.
I think we certainly want some of us to be on whatever.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
committee or
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. I think maybe it's a task force, maybe it's a working group made up of some users, some airport commission members, perhaps a council representative and staff. Absolutely. But I first wanted to approach the commission.
I also think that we should include some of the other stakeholders at the airport too.
Yeah, the flight services, get their input. I know before we did it, there were surveys that were sent out, but having them involved in the process could be helpful.
So do we need to make a motion to say that we're interested?
I think that would be just helpful. That way, that shows on the record that you are, that we come back and follow up with you.
So are you suggesting that you as city manager or Jackie or somebody would give us some direction for where the city thinks we ought to go, give us some guidance, give us some,
I think the way I would see it is if there's concurrence tonight that it makes sense to pursue this, I would come back with an outline of what a plan might look like, what the different components might be, and then work with the commission on framing that.
Refining it.
Yeah,
Yeah, give an initial
just
overall and then
what's the outline of a plan look like?
With
What are we looking for? And then
tweak it.
as part of that, there might be a component in there about stakeholder involvement, how we're going to use the stakeholders, how we're going to use the airport, the people out there, the people who are the tenants, the people who are providing flight services.
And the group's an advisory board. And quite frankly, the city does this across many of our areas of responsibility. We need to stay on top of things and do strategic planning and look down the road and what direction are we headed. That needs to occur anyways. I think you need the advisory board to be a part of that process, to provide that sense and reaching out and saying, okay, what about this? So, we can probably go out and hire some consultants and say, based on what happens elsewhere and how we predict the markets, these are some of the things you need to do. And ultimately, that needs to get some feedback, because that may be what he thinks. And as Tom said, most of us here. at least-
I think we need some of the feedback from various people before we hire the consultants, because
Well,
Yeah,
that's
gotta
part
get
of
them
selecting,
something.
going through a process. We got to define a scope. And even though you can say that, whether that type of entity or individuals out there, more often than not, you end up sometimes, I don't think you necessarily just need a cookie cutter. Here's the strategic plan they did in this community, and they just changed the names and put it in here. But so that becomes the challenge. I think the committee obviously needs to help too, and try to say, let's make sure we're clear what we're asking, what to try to do here, and what we're going to end up with.
well, if you're looking for a motion as to whether we'd like to go forward in this.
I think that'd be helpful, and then I can come back and provide you, Senator, an outline of what the next step would be, the logical next step would be.
I'll make that motion that we request the city manager to give us some direction, give us an outline how we might go forward and do some of the things, accomplish some of the things that we talked about today.
Strategic plan.
To formulate a strategic plan.
I like that.
Second that.
Okay, any other questions or concerns?
Do we need to call the
We're
roll?
going to call roll.
Mr. Amadon?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Mellon?
Yes.
Ms. Simonis?
Yes.
Councilman Rohr?
Yes.
Vice Chairwoman McIntyre?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks
your
very
time.
much for coming.
Thanks for coming, yeah.
Appreciate it.
When is the next regularly scheduled meeting of the commission?
October,
Okay.
third Thursday in October, which would be
Okay.
20th.
October 20th?
Yes.
So if there's one possibility would be to come back at that meeting. The other thing, just to make you aware of, obviously, there's probably a budgetary implication to this. If we do it in fiscal year 17, I would include a recommendation in my budget that I present to City Council on November 15th. So maybe that's the way to consider lining this up, but I'll follow up with you. And I will also provide you electronically, because it's a thick document, the plan that we did back in 2002. I'll give you that and our Economic Development Director's recommendation about economic development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bye, Greg.
All right. The next discussion appears on our agenda is the T-hanger rental rates.
I give you some handouts. You can have it. I won't talk too long. I'll go on the numbers. Pretty straightforward, but, background information. Linda sent me a list of some questions several months ago that came up perhaps at the previous meeting you had, and I'll go through those and answer those that, just make perspective.
How often do you run something like this, Dean? How often do you?
It's updated all the time, I mean, every year. Like I said, initially I did a lot of projections trying to look at different scenarios and hopefully get some buy-in from city council. But not a lot's changed. I mean, our taxes each year change a little bit. Some of the other costs change.
Fuel sales have tanked.
And when do any of these decisions need to be made?
Well, we can talk about that.
Okay.
The implications may or may not be.
Yeah. Cost of fuel.
Yeah.
I mean, from
It's not anything too overwhelming. Real quick, just two handouts, two spreadsheets that are green numbers across the top. The only difference between the two, one has at the top in parentheses under the little title, it says existing debt service. The other one does not. It's because that assumes I've been able to refinance, as I mentioned a little earlier, get lower debt service payments. But if you look at the one that says existing debt service, pretty straightforward. Top of the revenues, the hangar rent that we get in. Obviously, I had to go back to 2001 with historical information, but that was a longer spreadsheet, so I want to show in 2005 as actual numbers. 2016 is what we budget or expect to get, and then 2017 moving out on the revenue side. Now, this scenario, and I play with a bunch of different scenarios, and I don't know how it all play out, but this one just assumes, let's say there's a 5% increase in rent that's effective for 2017. And then, because even though, it's something I just know from past experience doing it every year, people get whatever. So the other, and then it also shows in 2020, 3 years later, another 5% increase, and in 2023. So in essence, every 3 years through 2031, a 5% increase in rent, which is less than 2% a year. But, and again, this is just a scenario. But looking at that scenario and then looking at the expenses below, know what the property taxes are now, who knows going down the road. Historically, they do go up. Electric costs, like I mentioned, there's maintenance costs. And then below that, there's debt service, principal interest. That's what our current bond payment schedule is to pay off the bonds. One of the questions was what's the outstanding balance as of the end of the $855,000 is what the outstanding principal is. And although I don't have the historical information, one of the reasons, even though we built the sea hangars in 2001, it's a little over $1.1 million. For the first 5 years, I issued short-term notes and just paid the interest, which was $20-some thousand a year. And I built up a fund balance then. I had about $140,000 built up. And then in 2006, I issued the long-term bonds, which matured in 2031, 25-year bonds. But this again reflects, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you look at that debt service and just the property tax, the rent's not covering that, and such that green number about 2/3 of the way down, that ending fund balance keeps going down. Eventually in 2031, when the bonds are paid off, theoretically, if all things play out like this, we'll still have $18,000 available. But I might note the maintenance, that includes about less than $1,000 a year in maintenance. The reason why I wanted to build up a fund balance and have it there is, something happens and we need to put $50,000 into something or whatever it is, or $100,000. At least I have the cash flow there to do that, and would have a period of time, a few years anyways, to look at rent adjustments if necessary to get it back to where it ultimately pays out. that's the way, doesn't change a whole lot year over year. That's where it's at. That's a little different than what we anticipated when I presented it in 2001. We were really looking at a 25-year payout period, but ultimately it became pretty apparent, I wasn't sure what the taxes were going to be, but when that all materialized, it's pretty apparent it's probably going to take maybe 30 years. But there is that possibility too, had we increased the rent at what was originally projected, we probably could have paid it off over 25 years. Whether that's because of market issues, because we didn't want to, or the recession. As I mentioned earlier, it's just as important to keep the occupancy up too. And that's always something that to stay on top of. The second summary, same sheet, again, the cash flow looks a little bit different, and the bigger difference is, at least I'm able to sustain that $150,000, $120,000 fund balance. Now, if that's the case, and I find out that I actually am able to issue this, refund this debt and reduce the debt service payments by $9,000 a year or so, one of the things I think we would look at is to try to plan out. We talked about, or Greg mentioned something about setting aside money for some maintenance. I think I'd like to get a little bit more specific and say, okay, it's by 2020, these units the newer ones are 20 years old. What's industry standards say? Are we going to have to replace the roofs? Do something like that after 30 years. I don't know. They're not complicated buildings, but it may be the doors or whatever else that need to be replaced, or the rollers, and try to look at over a period of time what we might project to be that maintenance type of things, or we need to invest back into the facility and make that part of it. That's what I have, at least on hangar rents. There were, again, Linda had sent me a couple other questions, and again, whether that answered at some point. When will the bonds be sat? 2031 is when we paid off. Current debt, outstanding principal is $855,000. That's how much was the final amount that was transferred from the general fund for the airport in 2015. Again, that becomes not always a simple answer. We look just at how we account for things. We have several different funds that have airport issues related to it. We have what we call an operations fund, where the fuel revenue, fuel expenses, is where Kevin's paid out of. It's where the other people that work out there at the airport, nothing in there for Joe's time or Public Works Director or Linda or anybody else. There's no overhead allocation, just those direct costs out there at the airport. Heat, electricity, and all those sort of things. 2015, we ended up subsidizing about a little less than $20,000 for operations, but that's not the only cost. We had about $10,000 that we put into asphalt that wasn't an FAA grant, and there was $494,000 out of the general fund that we put into FAA grant, that runway extension. So FAA's put in a lot of money. We got our share. We got to cover. That's 2015. 2016, roughly the same amounts budgeted for about operational subsidy, but we do have $115,000 for, I'm not sure what the equipment is, that we're using general fund money. I think it's
Refueling.
that comes out of general fund.
All equipment.
But we don't buy one of those every year, but so that's an equipment cost. And again, another $28,000, $30,000 we have towards the FAA grants. Again, we don't allocate a lot of overhead. There's no overhead citywide that gets allocated. We don't really treat the airport as we do our water, sewer, refuse, some of our other enterprise funds, where we can only charge rates sufficient to cover our costs. So we allocate audit costs, insurance, all these sort of things. Costs get rolled into that. Those operations that don't at the airport. It's basically just, here's our direct costs that we can identify specifically out at the airport. And revenue sources are primarily the rent on the old G hangars, which again, we don't have debt outstanding, so that helps. And the difference between what we buy our fuel for and what we sell it for. And there's a few other small miscellaneous revenues. But the sheet I handed out, this is something I give annually to the city council, which is a simple summary of, you can see it's got some historical information, not just from 2015, but going back to 2011. So.
How do you determine what you're going to put in for maintenance? Where does that amount come from, or how do you determine that?
as maintenance needs arise, probably at best. Now, there may be some routine things that they do out there. I put together the airport budget, so, you know, it comes out of Public Works. I would imagine that they know that there's something that's out there. We had a couple of years ago, there's some planned things. We wanted to paint some of the buildings out there and some different things like that, but,
Did some asphalt work last 2 years in a row, both of the entrance gates over behind the Russell hangar and going back in behind.
So it's basically what you estimate that the need is gonna be for that year,
It's basically,
essentially?
well, actually, we'd fall to Bill, but the immediate needs that we see are what we ask for to try to make repairs. We're getting ready to start that process here again, probably in the next 30 days. So, you know, now would be a good time probably to have a discussion on that also after this, but it's basically what we see, lack of better terms, is what needs to happen. Of course, it's not a grand vision of what we would like to see happen, just due to the funding mechanism. I mean, there's a lot of things there that are, you know, status quo. You know, you have a loss maintenance contractor, HVAC contact, lighting, fire extinguishers, fuel farm upkeep. I mean, a lot of those things come out of that maintenance of facility fund that, you know, are itemized in the budget every single year. You know, there's not, this year, $7,500 was for asphalt repairs and striping, which was the area repaired back behind the Shamrock hangar. So it's small projects of that nature that have been identified. The Russell hangar, when the roof went on it 3 years ago, that wasn't an identified project. We had to come to Dean and say, Dean, hey, you know, we're going to paint this roof this year recoat it for $6,000, but got up there and about fell through it. So, you know, there are some, like Dean says, the cost of the equipment and, you know, expenditures that arise that we have to go back through and discuss and figure out how to, Dean can help us pay for them.
one of the things I'm hoping to do, not just at the airport, we have a couple other operations where it lends itself to that is, and again, I'm not a big advocate to go out and hiring a lot of consultants, but it's not so much the consultant expertise I'm looking for. It's more to get more of a coordinated, documented game plan. Talk to people, there's entities out there that are this one, Miller Dodson Company, got an operation here in Columbus, but they do a lot of work for resorts, for places like that where they have infrastructure and they charge people, whether it's condo associations or whatever else, they have to maintain and charge fees. What fees do you charge? Well, most people, when they're not necessarily into that big way, it just becomes, well, if things break, then we have to go back to the members and raise their fees. Well, what we want to look at is a little bit more systematically, and like I said, not just at the airport, but some of our other facilities in our buildings and different things, is to take the primary equipment and buildings and, you know, not everything, not the minutia, but, you know, some of the HVAC equipment, the buildings, the whatever else, and look at that, what's an expected useful life, and plot that out over 25, 30, 40 years, and look at what the recommended maintenance would be on some of those things. Out at the airport, we got to look at some of the asphalt issues. You know, sometimes we get money from FAA, you know, we may not be able to count on that all the time. But you lay those out, you try to analyze that and say, what is it, not just what do we need to be spending to stay on top of our maintenance, but how does that correlate, in this case, whether it is in rents, you know, if you're just looking at new hangars or whatever else, or even existing hangars, what should you be charging to make sure that you're collecting money to pay for the maintenance you're going to need? And because too often, many places, they get into that point, and it's like, oh, now what do we do? Well, we're aware of some maintenance issues, how long you defer it, and then at some point, you know, you need to catch up with that. But I think it'll make it a lot easier and to have some sort of document that, depending on whether people are around or whatever else, we can kind of refer to each year when we do our 5-year capital plan. There's always going to be things that pop up to anticipate, but hopefully we can capture the bulk of the major potential maintenance issues and come up with a game plan. Now, if we do that, it's not earth-shattering, it's not anything new. We've done many, many times on our roads in Delaware. You know, the analysis, we go out, we do pavement analysis, we look at the conditions of the roads, we look at what it costs to maintain it, what it costs to fix them, and, you know, how they're categorized. It comes back and says we need to spend $4.5 million a year to keep a good level of service. Well, we've got $1.5 million to spend. That's where it becomes, we're used to that. How do you allocate limited resources? Do you raise people's rent or taxes or whatnot? But ultimately, you got to come up with a game plan and say, if nothing else, yeah, we're not probably going to be able to fix and do a lot of preventative maintenance per se. We're going to have to Band-Aid some things a little bit to keep it functioning, not, keep it safe and all that sort of stuff. But where it also can help is you really need to consider, not that there may be issues out at the airport, but before we go add some other item, it's going to need to be made and maintained. You better understand what the costs are to keep that. On a similar note, we did that. We had a lot of park improvements we made. We passed the park levy 2008 here in Delaware to make improvements. One of the more recent ones was put a splash pad out at one of our parks. Well, one thing to pay for that levy monies, what it's going to cost, because guess what? You're going to put some money into that, keep that thing functioning. And doing that, at least with some basic good information to help make those decisions, it needs to be considered before you go build the thing. If you know pretty much that you're not going to be able to maintain it, you got to ask yourself, whether it's makes sense to build that or not. So again, that'll hopefully help a little bit, at least communicate. And when the questions come up, here it is, and share it with people. Share with the airport advisory. If they would be something annual, say, well, yeah, you saw this last year. We're still in line with that. Here's how we're trying to stay ahead of the maintenance issues.
We just did, I'm on the condo association board, and we just went through one of those studies so that we could determine how much our association fees are going to be based on what needed to be done over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So it is helpful. I mean, it gives you a plan, and you know what you need to do.
After that, we tend to take care of things that we have eventually, maybe not as quickly as some people might expect, and because of our size, we've got that wherewithal. If we had to, we could, as Joe said, find some money somewhere at least cover it. But that's not the best way to do it. You can get a little bit more into trying to schedule and manage some of that sort of stuff. And some of it may be, even though it's not broken, we need to go out and do this. And I do know how tough it gets at budget time when there's limited resources. Everybody always has other priorities. No, you need to spend $10,000 oiling the widgets this year, otherwise it's going to create problems. I know you want to spend it on something else, but you need to do this because that's important to maintain our facility, or whatever it is.
I know we've always, part of the discussion that we've had over the years, when we get to this point where we're talking about raising rents and whatnot out there, that at some point it's always raised that, what are we using that money for? Why are we increasing the rent? And so, we need to give, I think, the renters some substantial information as to why.
I don't think you need substantial. I think, and I think we built those as cost effective as anybody did. It cost $1.1 million. If you as a private person would have built that and you had to pay that, you took out a mortgage for 30 years to pay for it, you got to pay that back. Just that and the taxes alone are more as far as an expense than what they're paying in rent. They're not paying enough to cover a whole lot more. So short of saying we feel that the city or the taxpayers should subsidize our private playing in a hangar to the tune of we're only going to pay 80% of the cost of having this, perhaps maybe you get a different council, but I can tell you I wouldn't have got very far 15 years ago telling that to city council. It's one thing to say the airport as a whole, and I think this council recognizes there's going to need to be some support, and there's a lot more than people think. Resources, how do you discount $465,000, something like that? But something like this, they looked at it a little bit differently. That probably should, that's fine. We'll take the risk, we'll build it, we'll front end it, but the people using it should pay for it over time. And yes, I could do the analysis that was done for your condo association. They'd probably come back and say the rents should probably be 30, 40% higher than what they are. Now, ultimately, the risk we had to take is that's great that you can post those rates, but if nobody wants to pay it, you only have 60% occupancy, there's an issue related to that too. But this notion, and I've heard it before, that where's the money going? I guess the question I would ask is, what money? I can't pay the debt service.
Well, there's more though. When you fill those hangars up, there's some incremental income that you get. You get some from fuel sales, you get some from the people who are taking flight lessons and, you know, some of the revenue that's generated from that. You get the rent and whatever else that comes off the maintenance facility and the radio shop there. There's more to it than just.
Right. We don't generate really any revenue from the FBO operations or whatever out there. We do get. Now, but we'll start
you get
the fuel though, again, that's a separate issue though, when you look at operationally, people look at what they're paying. Well, obviously we pay for that rent or that fuel, and there's a spread in there because we got to be competitive with our pricing. And this was an issue several years ago. The airports in or whatever, why would we need to have a lower price?
Some income taxes too from some of the people who work out there.
Let's say you'd be surprised how little income taxes generated at that airport. Personally, nothing that I can really count. But even that spread between, this kind of shows you a little bit what we pay for the fuel and what we sell it for. Again, we've got a fuel farm we've got to maintain. We've got to have staff out there to pump the fuel. We've got to maintain other sort of things. That's not a profitable situation. We know it's not. So that money is not going to go because that's being subsidized. I understand what you're saying, there is. And that's certainly one of those things that you look at. But for having those based aircraft, we probably wouldn't have as many people out there. But there'd be other things. So it's not like it's a bad thing, but it's not like this is generating all kind of money.
Has anybody ever mentioned for the increases, just, you know, tying it to some index? Maybe it's this consumer price index or, you know, something that maybe relates more to what that is. And, you know, we just set a precedent right then that whatever that has gone up, you know, as of October for the year before that, or whatever we would decide, that's what the tie downs go up. Maybe you don't do it every year because nobody likes an annual increase, but maybe every other year.
And that's kind of the pitch I gave City Council. But in reality, had we done that, even just tied it to inflation, I'm pretty confident. I can calculate a number to do it, but what was one of the price? Let's say it was $200 for one of the units. It would be at least $250, $260, $275. Just keep thinking, you really have it. You know, if you average it over the 15 years, it's been maybe 0.5% increase, even though it wasn't every year. If you annualize it, and inflation, although it's not by now, but over that time period, probably averaged 2 or 3%. And so the thing that does drive that to it, again, is, as I said, there's what the market will bear. Now we have a waiting list. My recollection is maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were getting a little thin. There wasn't necessarily a waiting list. So you got to be conscious of that too. The bottom line is, I think we're able to, if I had to get up in front of City Council and say, okay, where does this stand? We're halfway, 15 years into this risk-taking with these T-hangers. I think it's done what we've intended it to do. It's got more based aircraft. It's got more takeoff and landings. That helps us with our numbers with FAA as far as going after grant funding. It ultimately will pay for itself. And I still think, you know, depending on what that maintenance is that needs to occur, you know, 15 years old, but again, looking at it as I've presented here, I think there could be some money. How much money do we got to have to roll back into those? More than $100,000 to buy us another X number of years. I don't know, I haven't seen anybody quantify anything to say what it is that needs to be maintained. I know with the old units we had problems with rollers and things like that, but they're pretty simple buildings. And you got a little bit of maintenance here and there, but we assume there would be a bit more with these newer ones if they had some different amenities. But that's where that's at. And again, I think they track, I don't know, I can sit and say this is just a scenario. We bump them up 5% every 3 or 4 years for the next several years. I don't know how that's going to compare to Don Scott or Marysville or some of the others that perhaps maybe competing. I don't think we want to get to the point where, you know, our occupancy is going down.
We do track it. Dean, just for information here, this is at 100% capacity also, correct?
Actually, it's not. I think if you take the numbers that you are charging and you multiply it by the units, for whatever reason, are actual. I didn't go back and verify, but I just got some stuff from Rob. It's less than the amount I'm showing in the revenue coming in every year. Because I think there's, even if it's just a month or two transition, you might be keeping them full, but really I look at it as, you know, get 12 months a year, you get 5 units. If some of them just in the transition, we miss a month or two, that has an impact.
Kevin, what is the current hangar rate?
Occupancy?
No, rate. monthly charge for the hangers? What is the current rate?
Depends on what size hanger. and what-
179 for our cheapest one with a manual sliding door.
Okay.
Clear up to 405 if it's an electric bifold
Okay,
hinge unit with a door. We only have 4 or 5 of those. The basic rates are 246 for the electric bifold.
That's actually pretty reasonable.
So one of those things, I think as you talk, nobody wants to raise rents necessarily. You know, we heard some of this discussion tonight. I don't know. How do we determine those rates? Is it based on CPI? We can't just do that. You know, your costs may go up way more than that. They may not. Again, it's market driven. There's competition, but yet we want to charge enough to maintain these things. That's one of the things I think would be helpful from my standpoint, do some analysis. What is lacking as it pertains to maintenance? If we looked at those units, at least the new ones, are recently the 15 years old, and look out over the next 10, 15 years or so, what is it we might anticipate that needs to occur? And just like I said, I could do it I don't have to hire a consultant necessarily to do that. When you're talking just about that, what might that need to be? And with our current rents and some modest increases, would there be some funds available to do that? And look at it from that perspective.
Any other comments?
What do we have to increase it to break even right now? What percentage? Just to service the debt.
Assuming I can refinance and get a better rate, I think if we increase it, as I said, this scenario, say 5% this year, another 3 years, bump it up another 5% or so, I think we'll have funding there roughly about $150,000 a year, about $150,000 that conceivably over that time would go into maintenance. Without those increases, that's a much lower number. And again, I'm not going to get it down to where I need to have some sort of a reserve balance, because who knows, we could go through a year where whatever reason occupancy drops, not because of our rates, just because nobody can afford to have planes anymore. But so I don't know if that answers your question. I think at what I've laid out here gets us in a position where I think we'll be able to pay the debt off, and it might be 30 years instead of the original 25, and we can do a moderate amount of maintenance. If we think we can get by without doing no more than $800,000 or $900,000 a year in maintenance, then the rate increase maybe could be 3% instead of 5% or something like that.
How much of an impact do any of the leases that we have right now, do those need to be looked at again? And
The leases as far as,
we have the flight school and John's and, some of the other businesses that are on the property. I'm assuming we have leases with.
John has a lease, he has a 25-year term with options to renew for 2 more 25-year terms. We have a similar arrangement with Airspace Place, again, to get the investment. They're not going to just do it with a 5-year lease. They're going to invest their money, they need longer terms. With the flight schools, and I don't know if anybody's renting out any space in the admin building.
Flight schools, they just rent the hangar space from us, and they rent from John. Shamrock, they rent the hangar next door to us. We have an agreement with them, but that's really a large portion of our lease agreements right there.
Are they pretty much locked in to what until they're renewed, or?
No, the Shamrock right beside us, which isn't even discussed in this equation.
This is just the new,
Right.
we pay back.
Right, that's not even discussed right now is
Newer.
Shamrock's is a 1-year lease. John's is 25, Airspace Place is 30. So.
Now,
And all the T hangers are 1 year at a time.
Some are 6 months.
well, we have to keep them, this is something that came up, at least on the new ones that we borrow money for. They issue tax exempt debt, which helps keep the debt service down. We can't have long-term leases because then it becomes a private interest type of situation. So we're supposed to, hopefully they're still doing it. These things are still going wrong, not go out a year with these leases, because it has to be a short-term lease. If it's a
Correct.
long-term lease, then it makes it no longer tax exempt type of debt issuance. Now I'm going to pay 2, 3, 4% more per year interest on the bond, and that never pans out. keep in mind, when I'm talking about that from that standpoint, we have 3 moved, and then, those were paid off, or were paid off in 1990 something. And again, we don't have any debt service, so we're still collecting rent on those. And that's what's helped, along with the differential in our fuel sales, with paying for our operating costs. I set up a separate fund to isolate the costs associated with these new T hangers that we built in 2001, because the strings we had to pull to convince city council to take the risk. They wanted to be able to have this sort of analysis. And the first couple of years, they asked a lot about it, but since then, it's really only been me and apparently some others, but whether the communication was passed along properly or not. But I would have raised the red flag a long time ago if I felt that the fact that we didn't raise the rent the way it was originally thought it was going to need to be, if I felt that would have created problems. It hasn't. Like I said, I still think this thing can work out, but they're not necessarily no-brainers. And there's a certain amount of risk. I'm sure John kicks that around if he's looking at expanding. You might have interest. You got to discount it a little bit, say there are times where you're not full and whatever else.
I certainly don't think anyone could complain if there's not been an increase since, when did I hear, 2010?
2010?
I'm not a tenant anymore, but if I had not had an increase in 6 years and somebody said, I'm going to give you a 5% increase, I might kiss their feet.
But the other side is, one thing, it hasn't increased since 2010, but I can't, because I got these numbers from Rob, but my understanding is that whether it's the 42-foot regulars or whatever, but the rent was $195 in 2001. Currently it's $217. That's $22 in 15 years. It's not a whole lot.
But that fits with the government website that does the inflation. I ran the numbers while you were talking, and if we stay at we're at 179 now for the cheapest ones. So according to the government, by this year we should be at 191, because 13% over 10 years is what they calculate for inflation. So I don't see a 5% increase as being a huge deal.
And I don't necessarily either. Again, from my standpoint, recognizing, like I said, I would have raised the red flag. I've shared it a couple times over the years, reminding people, Public Works, reminding there needs to be some rental increase that was built into the models I laid out. Without that, it's not, it's going to be problematic. And where it comes up is this notion of, okay, at some point we're going to need some of that to go towards maintenance. Somebody tell me, well, we don't have to worry about maintenance for the first 30 years of these buildings, then it's not. So, like I said, I think we probably should bump that up and for that purpose. The other thing I want to make clear, and I don't know if I did before, at least these units don't generate money necessarily to go towards other operations. It's not like, where's our rent going? Again, those 3 older units, yes, we don't have the same cost. We pay taxes, we do all that sort of stuff. We don't have the debt service with a little bit of, we don't say profit, but positive cash flow. But again, that goes into the whole thing that reduces the general fund subsidy for the operations out there, which is that's what the selling point to council was too. Is in 25 years, when the debt's paid off, that'll help make it. It's not going to be self-supporting, but less of a subsidy.
And some of the land is still rented out, is that
Farmland.
farmland?
In essence, we ultimately, because we were charging somewhat of a farm rental rate, we then had tax situations, there'd be property taxes, because now we're in the business of renting our land for that purpose, and there really was no advantage to doing that. So right now, we kind of rent it for a nominal amount, primarily to keep it otherwise from being weeds. I think we regulate what they can and can't plant out there, and it's not a lot that we take in.
That way you don't have to mow it.
In essence, we don't rent it to them. They maintain it. It's looked at as a different transaction, so we don't have to mess around with the taxes, and we don't have to mow it.
They maintain it, basically treat about 45 acres with a sterilant, grow sterilant on the areas that we do mow. Or target.
So are we planning, Jamie, to vote on what we do as far as an increase tonight?
Well, let me jump in. Dean was saying the leases. So buildings A, B, and C, have a year-long lease.
Correct.
D, E, and F are 6-month leases. So every 6 months, I get new leases from those tenants.
What
Per their lease agreement, if we're going to increase it, I have to notify them 60 days in advance of the expiration of the lease agreement. So I would need to send something out by the end of October indicating that we're going to increase the rent rate. So
what I would recommend, because again, you're an advisor, you don't set the rates, ultimately through this one, council, whatever else. But from that standpoint, based on what's presented, I think it would be the vote with motion, yes, that there should be an increase in rent, whether it's exactly 5%, again, 4, or whatever, to keep the rental rates in market condition. And furthermore, maybe to help facilitate some potential maintenance coming down the road. Then, as part of our budget process, we'll go through and we'll look at that, and that'll occur. We'll have plenty of time, because it probably won't be effective until January 1st or something like that. Enough lead time to make everybody aware.
Oh, we'll have another meeting.
So we make a motion to recommend the council and a rent increases up.
Or, yeah.
Correct.
That's it.
Okay. Someone want to make a
All right,
motion?
Kyle, what is it?
What's that?
What are you gonna do?
I think she.
I make a motion that we support Dean's raising of the rent
5%.
5%.
Okay, I'll second it for discussion.
Okay.
Okay,
So we have 2 seconds.
Go ahead.
okay, but for discussion, he wants additional discussion, correct?
Yeah, because clearly we need more than 5%. I mean, I'm not suggesting we do more than 5% in one fell swoop. But what if we were to do a 2-step process or a 2-step rate? Maybe we do 5% now, but then go ahead and make it known to everyone that in another 18 months or whatever we choose to do, it's going to go up another 2-3% or whatever to get it up, not to price us out of the market, because we don't want everybody moving to Marysville, but
But to be competitive.
but to be, so that we can recover our costs, because I wouldn't want to have it put in the paper or something that, we're achieving 80% of our cost and that we're supplementing pilots who base airplanes out there. I mean,
And we're not, I don't get that impression. The cash flow is such, but again, because of the way I structured the debt, what we ultimately did, and I'd like to, there's a possibility, depending on what the rents are, of actually paying that debt off in 25 years instead of 30. Obviously, you know that with your mortgage, your house, if you have a 25-year mortgage versus a 30-year, you're going to pay more over time, but you're going to pay less per month. And there's a potential that we perhaps could, because that was kind of the game plan. And if we get that debt paid off in 25 years, again, now we're not paying debt service. Any of that cash flow, positive cash flow, gets rolled back into the airport. And that's probably a good thing. The sooner we get to that point, the better. So, right now the cash flow is negative, but I build up a fund balance through how we financed it to cover that. And it'll pencil out and it'll pay for itself.
but only because you paid interest only for the first 5 years.
Right. The wild card bit becomes this maintenance. And what I would perhaps suggest is if we do the 5%, that, as I mentioned earlier, I think we need to have, at least need to communicate, not just the public, but to the tenants out there. We looked at a long-term maintenance issue, and we think, though I'm just making this up, we are anticipating that we're going to need to spend $50,000 in 2019 and another $50,000 in 2021. And to work that in, here's how you can see the cash flow so that we can do that. What that maintenance is what you would share with. I don't know what it might be, because I don't know what the maintenance needs are. Maybe replacing all the doors, or putting the new roof on, whatever, redoing the approaches that come from the access ramps. Whatever it is, I think we can lay that out a little bit and then step back and say, yeah, it's going to take a little while until we get to that point where the debt is paid off, but we're looking at this even beyond that. And we don't want to have in 25 years buildings that basically we got to replace because they're completely worn out or whatever else.
So do we need to amend the motion that we tentatively approve the 5% based upon you coming back in October with a plan, a feasibility plan?
It wouldn't necessarily be me, but
No, but I meant
come back in
with a plan-
October and
with a
lay
plan in
out what
October
those
laid
means.
out.
That may take a little bit more effort than that. So what I would suggest, again, obviously you're going to meet on a more regular basis than that, not in 3 years, but I think if we get this rent proposed increase effective, maybe the first part of the year, and as things, one of the things you put on your agenda is to kind of work towards having a little bit more of a longer-term maintenance game plan laid out for these units, and that might take staff some time. It might take the airport commission a couple meetings to get their hands around and say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But ultimately, who knows? Maybe it's later, next year, you come back in and you say, we've got a pretty good idea what this is going to look like over the next 15 years. And we've tied it back into some rents. The best way we think to do that is we're going to use inflation because we think, or whatever it is.
What are your thoughts on setting it a couple years ahead of time? Is that a good idea or is it a bad idea because we don't know what inflation is going to do for the next couple of years?
I had this several years ago with like water and sewer rates. We put a lot of capital investment into water plant expense, $30 million. And, trying to, we did a first with our wastewater plant, it was about $25 million improvement. And I told council at the time, yes, we're taking in capacity fees, but if housing drops down, we're going to have to raise our rates. Well, I hear that. So ultimately that kind of materialized. I had to come back with rate increases. Why are you increasing our rates? Blah, blah, blah. Well, when we did the water plant expansion a few years later, I said, now, before you agree to spend $30 million, you need to put in place rate increases because this is what I'm pretty sure it's going to need. You need to adopt it now because if you're not willing to do that, raise those rates, then maybe you need to reconsider doing that. So sometimes that works. In this case, I think there's other market issues. You're probably not necessarily going, now you can telegraph that, yeah, we're probably there, probably going to be these guys. If the tenants, what they had, 5% rate increase, yeah, and this is why, you're probably going to see another one in 2 or 3 years.
What if we put together like a fact sheet to go with the notices that we
But
send
the
out
point being,
to the tenants? It'll kind of ease the blow, I guess, to let them know what's coming.
Technically, some of our rates out there at the airport, we do have some city rates that are approved by council, and they lend themselves towards that. When you're talking about fuel prices, we can't be running the city council every week to change our fuel prices. Now, hangar rents is a little bit more static, but somewhat, if this 5%, I don't know, I have to check our fee schedule, whether airport rents is included or not. I don't think it is. So technically, it doesn't take legislative action, but we post those rates, and that becomes our rates. And again, at some point, market conditions come into play. We'll be locked into saying that we've already adopted a 5% increase in 3 years when we need to do something less than that to keep it functional. So, and then I think that works. Is it enough for the tenants out there? Well, I don't know that anybody, I think it probably can be. And part of it, like Kyle said, is to get some information out to them and say, hey, I think they would understand that. We're just trying to maintain the units and charge enough to do that.
So are you saying the hangar rate increases do not need to be passed upon by council?
I can't say it factually. What we did do as a council, I don't know, maybe that
They are included. We have a fee schedule, and I believe that does typically go in the budget.
we've
And
done
those are
our fee
listed
schedule.
in
It doesn't
there.
go in the budget. Budget doesn't dictate rates. We, several years ago, put together a more consolidated fee schedule because many of our ordinances, whether it be planning development fees or building inspection fees, they were embedded in some ordinance. It would say in there that, a fence permit costs $10, but then it changed for 30 years. So council, several years ago, we took an initiative. We pulled a lot of those fees out of the underlying ordinances that called for them. We have what we call fee schedule, but not all our fees. Our water rates aren't included in there because that's a factor of something different. It's not something we have to go to city council, change our water rates, but it's not in that fee schedule. Linda says it is, and it very well maybe. I just don't know for certain. I know our fuel rates aren't at the airport because, again, that could change weekly and daily. The rents, I don't know, maybe it is. Maybe that's why it hasn't changed in 6 years, but I can verify. But if it is, then what it would be is, again, we'd be reintroducing that general fee schedule to city council and saying, these rents are going up to this level. And then council would formally adopt it through legislation.
Okay, so what was our motion?
Recommend to council the support of the 5% rent increase, and then you seconded for discussion, so.
So now we've got to do the
where we're at.
roll call.
So-
Unless there's more discussion.
Yeah, is there more, any other discussions?
So we're not going to.
You don't want to tie it to rate increases down.
That's what I asked.
Well, we
Do
would either
need
have to
the
amend it,
motion?
or we have to vote for it, or vote it down, and then if it's voted down, then potentially another motion could come up.
I'm fine with it the way it is. So.
Since I made the motion, can I amend the motion before it gets voted upon?
You may do whatever you want.
Okay, so I make a motion that we approve the initial 5% with study to determine what the future increases will be and on what scale and at what time frame the future increases will be.
Second.
So to determine timeframe.
To determine the time frame and the amount for future increases. TBD.
But I think we have to vote on the amendment first, and then vote on the motion as amended.
Vote as amended?
Darren's not here, but I'll be the
That's fine.
parliamentarian.
So we have to vote on whether or not.
I think we have to
approve
vote
it.
on her, a motion to amend the motion.
And then vote on
And
the
then if we
No, I
accept the
think, because
amendment.
we never voted.
We never voted on the
first
motion.
amendment, or excuse me, we never voted on the first motion.
But I think it has to be either,
It'll just be.
This is an
written-
advisory committee anyway.
Yeah, it'll just be written into the motion, that the discussion was held and then that the motion was, but we can do either way. I'm fine. It's just
we'll go through.
a little extra typing.
All right, let's go with it the way it is. We have a motion, we have a second. Let's do the roll.
Mr. Amadon,
Yes.
Mr. Lewis,
Yes.
Mr. Mellon. Oh, sorry, you left. Ms. Simonis?
Yes.
Councilman Rohr,
Yes.
Vice Chairwoman McIntyre.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to recommend a 5% increase and then talk about it some more to see when we do it.
So we'll bring
That's
it up
right.
again at the October meeting.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Next, we have member comments. Anyone else have anything aside from what we've already discussed? Anything?
And I forgot to put a topic for staff comments, so I don't know if Jill and Kevin have anything additional.
I didn't know if anybody wanted any update on the ODOT and the FAA project or not, but as everybody knows, September 12th through the 16th, we'll be doing the grooving and painting, which will finalize hopefully that project. We will have some walkthrough, punch out, final dirt work. The reason we had to wait until September instead of doing that back to back is due to the fact that per FAA regulations, the asphalt had to cure 30 days. So I know there were some individuals that had questioned that, and that's the reasoning behind it. Also, to reiterate what Dean said here a little bit ago, is if you guys remember, we'd asked Mr. Galb to, with his background, to look at some of the facilities and give us his opinions. So we have already kind of taken a proactive approach. Kevin and Walt have spent a little bit of time on the facility, looking at some things that they think may need addressed on the road. So I guess we have already kind of addressed that to some degree. Have we finalized it? No. But Kevin can probably talk a little bit more on that. But I think I volunteered Walt to assist.
Yeah, Walt came out, we looked at a couple hangars, old, new, and although it was nothing very in-depth, we both came to the conclusion that probably the first thing that would need to be taken care of would be the roofs on the old hangars first. So inside and structurally, the hangars are sound. As Dean mentioned a few years back, we did replace several trolleys, the rollers on the old ones, and we've taken care of most of them. So probably roof issues would be the first thing we need to deal with down the road.
On the older hangars.
Just on the older hangars. not more.
And in the minutes from the last meeting, there was a discussion about insulation.
Yes, on those old hangars, the insulation is just on the ceiling. So if the roofs were replaced, new insulation would be put on at that time, because the way it's put on is the insulation was rolled on, then the sheeting pinches the insulation. There's no way to,
Up against the Z channel, it's actually screwed through the insulation.
Oh,
there's no way to actually put the same system in, that you wouldn't still have a hanging problem. The birds have pecked at it over the years, it's fallen down, we've done the best we can to tape it up, but probably until we actually put new up there, it will be.
so you have to do the new, it has to be a new roof in order to do that.
The sheeting would need to come off to put this insulation in because it's pinched into place by the sheeting.
Okay.
Another thing on the agenda too is we were just made aware that the flight check should be happening on the Pappies and Reels from the FAA the first week after Labor Day. After September 5th, they will be here to flight check those. So we're kind of at their mercy before those can be utilized. As you guys know that they've been noted out. The other thing is too, we just received confirmation on the taxiway A that ODOT did deny the mill and fill construction portion of taxiway A, which was no surprise due to the amount, but in the same token, speaking with Brian Tinkoff throughout this project, is the FAA has been very supportive of it. We'll have to go through that process here this fall because of their fiscal year, but all indications are that the FAA will actually pick that project up. So that being said, I wasn't really surprised, kind of a precursor from ODOT that, asking for $400,000 again, even though I asked Dave Dennis, I said it sure would be nice to get a project up front instead of the very end. But right now, speaking with Brian, I don't think that's going to be an issue on that process. So unless something changes or their funding changes drastically over the next 3 or 4 months, it's still it's a negative, but it's positive, I guess, in the long run. End up using some entitlement funding. E-Sign Genie, I know everybody's, we've had a few people still having little issues with the online signing T-hanger leases, but it's kind of funny because everyone says, we need to get in the 2,000 range and get up to speed on emails and everything of that nature. And then, you have this handful come out after the fact, like, oh, I just want my paperwork. So I think the airport's the first ones, kind of the precursor for the entire city on that. Linda and Kevin have worked a lot. Our IT department's worked a lot on that, but I think it's a great thing personally, as far as paperwork is concerned and tracking. It lets Linda know, who's seen their leases, who's, acting upon, who hasn't done anything. But I think it's been a great tool, and it's kind of, the airport's kind of leading the charge there for the city. So we're the guinea pigs for that project. That's all I have. You have anything, Kevin?
I do not. Other than, as Dean and Joe both mentioned, we did purchase a refurbished fuel truck. It's a 2006 3,000 gallon Jet A truck. What we had been using previously was a 1988 2,200 gallon jet fuel truck. All the jet fuel at the airport is pumped through the truck, none is through the cabin. So every gallon we sell goes through the truck. That 1988 Volvo has flowed a lot of fuel through it since it was purchased. I believe that was in 2000 or 2001. So we bought that truck from Epic. It was a turned-in leased truck. It went to Skymark in Findlay, and they refurbished it, fixed anything that needed to be fixed, repainted it, and it looks like a new truck right now. And to us, it is. So it gives us more capacity. It gives us the ability to fuel. Well, since the runway's open, we've had days where we've sold 12, 14, 1,500 gallons of fuel. When you only have a 2,200 gallon truck, you've got to kind of pay attention to your schedule so the truck doesn't run out, because it does take about an hour to fill it. So it's good to have more capacity, plus it fuels faster.
Anything else? Anyone else? Has there already been any discussion about having a open house or grand reopening or anything once everything's finished out there?
Nope, nothing I've heard it. I think the last airport commission meeting, there was something, a discussion along with the EA breakfast, if I remember correctly, maybe having something on that day, but that's all I recall ever hearing, Jamie, unless you've heard something different.
Nope. Okay, anything else?
I would say, as the new person on the committee, and I didn't know a great deal about the airport, but John gave me a tour a couple of weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, so thank you for that.
Oh, very good.
Nice to see the airport and everything, so.
Good.
They arranged to give you a bird's eye view.
He doesn't trust us.
I'm only saying, a few years ago, we had a few offers to go off someone's head.
Probably when I worked for the city prosecutor's office, probably about 2001, 2002, I went up with a state highway patrolman that picked me up in Delaware.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn if there's nothing else?
I move to adjourn. I'll second Kyle's.
We're adjourned.
We're adjourned. Thank you for coming,
Thank you
everyone.
all.